Following the global uproar against the Israeli starvation campaign in Gaza, things have happened in the past 24 hours that indicate that things are starting to get lifted slowly, with more reports about aid going into the Gaza Strip, and not only through Israel. Let's begin with this report here. In Israel, they are speaking about the IDF beginning a series of operations to supposedly deny the false claims of Hamas about starvation. Since when did Israel even care about the false claims or true claims of Hamas? Something happened here. In this report, it's discussing an IDF statement where they're confirming that the IDF themselves are going to be dropping air aid inside of the Gaza Strip, not other countries. We'll get to the other countries in a second. And also that they will be allowing the UN to control aid going into the Gaza Strip. This is a direct concession and something that Israel completely refused to do before. They were claiming all the time that this aid goes inside of the Gaza Strip and is stolen by Hamas. Therefore, they had this Genocide Humanitarian Foundation, or the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that is run by the United States mercenaries in Gaza in concentration camps where they shoot people to death when they're going to seek aid. What changed exactly? Well, this is a direct response to the global pressure, to the people protesting, to the people speaking up, to all of the popular demands to end this. Multiple things happened as well that led Benjamin Netanyahu to exclude the ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich in relation to allowing this aid inside of the Gaza Strip. They had a meeting in Israel, a cabinet meeting that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir had to participate in. So this is what happened here. There were a couple of reports about this, but not headlines, because Israel is trying to not make this too much of a big deal. This is what happened. The decision of the political echelon to open monetary corridors for the UN convoys in the Gaza Strip was made on Saturday in a phone call between members of the small cabinet. Listen to this. A senior official close to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir on Saturday night and informed him of the decision, claiming that it was decided not to invite him and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich because they didn't want them to desecrate the Shabbat. Ben-Gvir was furious. Just excuses. You didn't want to bring us so that we wouldn't tell you our opinion. This is a big mistake, delusional. You didn't include me because you knew I was against it. Very serious. So what did Netanyahu do? He basically had a cabinet meeting and excluded these two ministers because, according to him, and the excuse was they can't attend meetings in the Israeli Shabbat because they are religious people. Clearly, he made that decision behind their back to allow the aid inside of the Gaza Strip because he knew very well that these people are against it outright. What else happened where there were multiple reports about aid going in, dropped aid through the air from the United Kingdom, Jordan, and the UAE, and Egypt. All of that is very serious. All of a sudden, there are developments on that front, and everything is happening very quickly. After this pessimistic round of the United States, we'll get to that in a second. There's another very important thing that's going to happen. From tomorrow, there's going to be a humanitarian ceasefire inside of the Gaza Strip. Again, reports inside of Israel that are not making it as headlines. These are like flash news reports coming from like Ynet, for example, in Israel. What are they saying exactly? A humanitarian ceasefire was decided to be held in the Gaza Strip beginning tomorrow and will take place in several locations, including the north of the Strip. at least one location will have a ceasefire at 10 a.m. What do you mean all of a sudden a ceasefire? When no one told us that the ceasefire is beginning. Are they beginning like a pilot of a ceasefire? Or is there something behind the scenes that caused Israel to immediately allow this aid in and start a ceasefire process without a declaration? And Netanyahu not inviting Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and allowing the UN to distribute aid, something that he has been against for years now, for over a year and a half. He has been against the UN, calling them supporters of Hamas, and Hamas operate with them and all of that. All of a sudden allowing other countries to drop aid, all of a sudden talking about what happened exactly. Was the American move something intended to apply pressure on Israel? That's something that we discussed yesterday as a reason why the United States could have done this move, because it was reported that their move was there to apply pressure on Hamas. But I spoke about the potential of that being actually pressure on Israel. So was it pressure on Israel? With the American administration saying the complete contradicting statements, blaming the Palestinian side? What happened exactly? Clearly something happened behind closed doors, and now we're seeing some of the results. There were also more statements coming out today from senior figures in Hamas. One of them is called Ghazi Hamad, who said that talks are resuming this week. The talks are starting again, which also clarifies that this move that was coming from the United States administration had something that wasn't really published to the media. They clearly had certain threats coming to the Israelis primarily without an outright public declaration of it that told them, let's push it there. However, there is another scenario. And that scenario is we are heading towards the end of July. We are heading towards the holiday of the Israeli Knesset, 2 months, two and a half months approximately of a break of the Israeli Knesset, during which no moves can be taken against Benjamin Netanyahu to threaten his coalition. And 3 weeks ago, I was speaking about the prospect of that happening with Benjamin Netanyahu when it reaches this stage, because that way he would avoid any risk to his coalition directly, but he would be able to have a ceasefire and protect his government at the same time without any repercussions. And when the time comes, just before the Jewish holidays in Israel, he would have more reason. He would have already created a precedent. Then he would have more reason to extend a temporary ceasefire up until it reaches a permanent ceasefire towards the new elections that he is likely to hold early in 2026 rather than the end of 2020. That's now almost a given. That's something that's almost confirmed now, without it being officially confirmed. So we're seeing progress here, and we're seeing things that are totally contradicting the statements that came from the United States about all of the talks collapsing and blaming Hamas, and everything is ending and the world is going through hell. Gaza Strip is going to go through hell again. What's contributing to that apart from the continuation of the talks, the timeline of Netanyahu, this move from the United States, and the fact that we're reaching the break of the Israeli Knesset, and the global pressure that's happening against the starvation campaign in Gaza, the Palestinian resistance? Al-Qassam brigades, they carried out a complex ambush targeting 3 Israeli armored personnel carriers east of Khan Yunis. This is an area that Israel has been in and out of for 5 times now. And at one point they claimed that they took down the whole brigades of the Palestinian resistance and tunnels also of the Palestinian resistance. So what happened exactly? Well, the Palestinian resistance, they announced that soldiers and military vehicles were targeted on Saturday evening in a complex ambush by the Palestinian resistance in the Abasan al-Kabira area east of Khan Yunis. Al-Ghassam Brigade explained in a statement published on Telegram that during the complex ambush, its fighters were able to target 2 Zionist personnel carriers with 2 explosive devices, noting that they were placed inside the command rooms, which led to the burning of the 2 vehicles and their crews. You're talking about at least 12 people in each APC. It indicated that its fighters were also able to target a 3rd Israeli personnel carrier with a Yasin 105 missile, noting that it observed an Israeli military evacuator burying the vehicles to extinguish the fire and a helicopter landing for evacuation. That is another huge reason why Israel eventually will have to go to a ceasefire. So an escalation in relation to the resistance, more reports about all of this aid going in. We're closer to the period of the Knesset breakup. Is something about to be declared very soon? And was this move from the United States just to apply pressure on Israel? Clearly something is happening here, and we're seeing actions being implemented on the ground without a declaration. Either this would be a move that comes before the actual ceasefire, whether initially it would be declared as a 60-day ceasefire or an all-out deal and that's it. It's most likely going to be a declaration of a temporary ceasefire leading to a permanent ceasefire. However, again, there could be surprise there. 2, the second option, we're seeing a similar period to what I called at the time an undeclared or unofficial semi-ceasefire at the time, when there were humanitarian ceasefires, more aid was going in, people were going back to the north of Gaza without there being a declaration of a ceasefire. So that could be a move coming from Israel to lift the pressure that is being applied on it by the global protests, of course, applying pressure on their governments to act and apply more pressure against Israel. However, Netanyahu would continue with whatever he wants to do inside of the Gaza Strip, even after they come back from the holiday of the Israeli Knesset. So there are very important developments happening here, and in the next few days there will be more clarifications whether things are going towards a de-escalation or not. But what's for sure is, on the aid front, something is definitely happening, especially with the fact that Israel itself and the IDF itself is confirming in their own statements that they are about to allow the UN to allow aid in, with Benjamin Netanyahu excluding Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir from the meetings that confirmed this decision, only for him to later on confirm it with them over the phone. On another note, the Israeli terror forces just took control of the Handala ship. There was a video being published of the moment where the Israeli terror forces came to the ship and took control of it. This was published in one of the Israeli media outlets. As you can see in this video, the Israeli forces are coming in this area over here. 2 ships, according to the crew. The crew previously stated that they were hearing and seeing some of the ships coming over. They prepared themselves. They had the sirens being activated on the ship, and then later on the Israeli terror forces came in and started to get closer to that ship. As we can see, these are the first initial moments of the Israeli forces coming aboard on that ship. So the boats that Israel used this time were clearly not like large army ships, but rather than small boats, because they were expecting for there to be and they were expecting it to basically be an easy job without them having to face any sort of resistance, and the people who are there are again carrying out a humanitarian act to break the siege of the Gaza Strip. And the fact that we're seeing the aid, or reports about the aid going in now, Israel lifting some of these restrictions about food and medicine going inside of the Gaza Strip, this is a result of pressure like this. This is the second boat now going to Gaza during this genocide, and more people were talking about the prospect of more larger quantities going and trying to reach the Gaza Strip. They had also more of their Israeli terrorists coming aboard. After you can see here, some of them going in as well. They also made sure that they document everything. One of them was a cameraman, not to give anyone any sort of excuses or anything. Videoing and recording everything. This guy over here. Now, it will most likely be a similar scenario like they had with the previous crew. Well, they will potentially ask them to sign a few documents for them to be released. However, even if they don't wish to sign them, Israel will most likely eventually release them just to avoid more mess and more pressure and more scrutiny. They don't need that. Their image is in the pits. Their situation isn't great, and they know that very well. As a matter of fact, the previous Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, he's saying now that the Zionist vision is totally collapsing. He had an article in the Israeli Haaretz saying this is an emergency call. The Zionist vision is collapsing. Israel of the Declaration of the Independence and the Zionist vision is collapsing, calling on the Israeli public to rise in mass civil disobedience to force the resignation of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Describing the situation as a national emergency, Barak warned that the country is heading toward dictatorship under a coalition driven by the messianic vision of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, the sectoral greed of the ultra-Orthodox, and the personal interests of Benjamin Netanyahu. The hostages are being sacrificed on the altar of the government's survival, he wrote, blaming Netanyahu for repeatedly obstructing opportunities for their release. We are stuck in a war of deception in Gaza. Blood is flowing. The families and businesses of reservists are collapsing. And at the same time, draft dodging is thriving. Meanwhile, judicial reforms continue to trample the gatekeepers, and the Prime Minister is entangled in the Qatar Gate and build scandals. In order to survive, he is striving to turn Israel into a dictatorship, appointing yes men to lead the Shin Bet and Attorney General's office, and breaking the Supreme Court. Nothing is unthinkable, not even the cancellation of free elections and the rise of armed right-wing militias. The constitutional moment has already arrived. As children, we recited Am Yisrael Chai, or the people of Israel live or are alive. And today some complete the phrase Chai Beseret, or living in a fantasy or in a movie. So they know exactly where the country is headed based on the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and all of the global situation Israel is facing at the moment. Therefore, we're having a very important moment now where things could go either towards a positive direction, because the Palestinian side, the Israeli side, and the mediators all showed were surprised basically by the American move, and now we're clearly seeing things moving. As a matter of fact, Israeli sources said today that the Israeli families of the prisoners of war, the politicians in Israel, and Hamas, all of them did not know the reasons behind the American statements that were made, especially the ones that Steve Witkoff had. There is no collapse in the negotiations, according to the Israeli reports, and they're going to continue in days. Israeli reports and also the Palestinian side too. This all means that, well, the pressure is working. There is no collapse in the negotiations. The statements that came from the United States could have been a form of pressure to be applied on Israel by stating it's against the Palestinian side, which is normal, by the way, for them to do that, to try and reach a deal. By the movements that happened today and by the reports that are coming out today about this humanitarian ceasefire, about this aid being allowed to go in through non-GHF organizations, all of that is showing that there are things on the ground. Of course, the next few days will prove exactly where things are headed to.